Welcome back, everyone, to the TheEngiNerdLife podcast. This is a show about the future of construction without all the buzzwords. Instead, we're having the honest, human, and practical conversations about what's working, what's not working, and what many of us are still trying to figure out. So in each episode, we sit down with someone who has a unique skill or superpower that they're using to make the industry better. And today, I am so excited because I've been following Megan for a long, long time online, and then we finally got to meet in person this year. And she is the construction contract guru herself. So, Megan, I want to say welcome to the show. It's so exciting to have you here.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here too. And I just have to say that I'm not sure which one of us was more excited when we ran into each other at that conference. When I spotted you in the back of the room from the stage, I was like, is that AJ? Oh my gosh. So I think we were both pretty excited to meet each other.
Yeah, I know I was definitely fanboying from the back, but yeah, it's one of those things where, this industry is a really small industry, but
Yeah.
as I mentioned, you are the kind of contracts guru, if you will. You're an attorney, but also a coach, and you have that unique ability that helps you recognize and utilize leverage in a way that that people don't realize they may already have. And so, what's interesting about all this, like, popular early 2000 movies aside, going into law isn't always like the dream job, right? Like, I remember my mom telling me I need to be a lawyer because I argued so well, supposedly. But like, what was it that first pulled Megan toward law, and specifically construction law?
Well, I don't know how to answer that question since you already disregarded early 2000s movies. But I guess because you didn't disregard TV shows, I'm still okay.
Okay.
I was one of those rare people that kind of always knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. I grew up on Law and Order, and I
Yes.
don't know if you remember the original with Jack McCoy, but
Mm-hmm.
in classic 90s fashion, he was like, of course, the big DA in New York City, and his assistant DA was always like a young girl, like every time. It was just like a total archetype, right? And so I wanted to be Jack McCoy's next ADA for forever. And so it was, in fact, sort of pop culture that initially got me interested. Obviously, it's nothing like TV and movies. And I realized that well before I actually made the decision to go to law school. But that was sort of what planted the initial seed into going to law school and being a lawyer. Because I wanted to be Jack McCoy's ADA, I thought that I was going to do criminal law. And so I sort of focused on criminal law when I was in law school. But I graduated law school in 2009, and we all remember what the economy was doing in 2009. And so every single district attorney's office, every single public defender's office in California went on hiring freezes. And so I sort of had a decision to make, like, okay, well, I need to pivot. And so the closest thing to criminal law, the trial experience, is what I was really passionate about, was civil litigation, which is basically anything that happens in a courtroom that's not criminal law. And so I pivoted to civil litigation, and it was through that pivot that I sort of accidentally stumbled into construction law. I wish I could say to you that it was like a conscious effort, that there was something about construction law that always drew me in from being a little girl, but that wasn't the case. When I started at the firm, there was a much smaller construction practice at the time, and the habit was to sort of pass it on to the newest attorney as sort of training ground. And I got really lucky, though, because at the same time that it was passed down to me, our primary construction client was a concrete subcontractor at the time, and they had just hired a new general manager within a couple of months of when I was hired. And so we both kind of inherited their litigation portfolio at the same time. And so we looked at each other and we sort of said, like, whatever our predecessors were doing, this is an opportunity for us to build this practice the way we want it to be and to handle your cases and litigation portfolio the way we want to do it. And so I discovered not only a passion for construction law, but actually a passion for concrete. I am actually a huge concrete nerd. I love concrete. And so I eventually went to the partners at the firm at the time and I said, hey, I don't want you to keep passing this on. I want to own this book of business. I want to own this area of practice, and I want to grow it. And so that was really sort of how it happened. It was kind of by accident.
That's awesome. And what I love about that is that you volunteered for something that other people tended to like pass on to the next person and the next person. It's similar. Like that's how I kind of landed into the tech side of construction. Is I volunteered for a random tech project when our company was undergoing a major transformation, and sure enough, I fell in love with it. And then I was like, hey, can I stay here instead of going back to the field, which was opposite of everyone else? That's super cool.
Yeah.
So then, okay, fast forward now, you're running this book of business. You're starting to figure things out. You're loving concrete, which I love as well. That's awesome. But so tell me, was there a point in which you started to notice, as you were going through different contracts and going through different cases, that the issues and the problems started well before anyone ever called you? Like, this was something that we should have caught months, years, clauses ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I kind of mentioned at the beginning that I'm traditionally I'm sort of a litigator by training, right? So I do the courtroom stuff. I'm doing the fighting and the battling when the lawsuit has actually been filed. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that, I definitely 100% really early on really started noticing that the same problems that were resulting in lawsuits were happening over and over and over again. And most of the time, they were situations that could have been mitigated had we as the attorneys been involved on the front end. And so I really
Ah,
realized there was an opportunity to sort of build out a much more proactive risk management process as opposed to simply always being reactive and responding once a lawsuit was filed. And that was when I really sort of started to recognize the patterns and work with my clients on figuring out how we could what's that phrase? You never want to spend a pound to save a penny. I'm totally butchering that
oh
phrase.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally butchering it. But the problem was that they never wanted to spend the money to call me to ask me the question when they got the contract across their desk in the first place, right? They're like, well, we know how to read a construction contract. They're all pretty much the same. We all do them the same. And I mostly, by the way, represent the trades. And so they're usually on the receiving end of a contract. And it's
Mm-hmm.
usually being coupled with an admonition from the GC that they don't accept red lines anyway. So my clients never really thought that it was a worthwhile use of their limited resources to have me jump in at that phase. But once we got into enough litigation where I'm saying, okay, well, now it's a $100,000 problem when you could have paid me $200 to ask the question so we could have dealt with this a year ago, and now we're having a $100,000 problem. And
Right.
so I realized and recognized that pattern often enough to point it out to my clients that, like, hey guys, let's not be, what is it, penny wise and pound foolish. There it is. I pulled
There
it
it
out.
is.
Let's not be penny wise and pound foolish. Let's be a little bit more proactive, and maybe we can mitigate some of these lawsuits so that they don't end up happening at all. Or if they do, we're at least in a better position to have a more favorable outcome than we otherwise would have been.
And what I find most, what I find coolest about all of that is not only did you start having those conversations one on one with the people you were already working with, but like you elevated that. You took it and said, all right, we need teaching, we need coaching, we need to build communities that understand this sort of pattern, that understand these things going wrong. So you were seeing, pattern recognition. That was one of the things. Was there anything else that led you to believe that, these communities needed created, that the industry needed this education, and it was the right time to provide it?
Yeah. So I'd been in practice for probably 13-ish years before I ever rolled out any sort of coaching or anything that I'm doing sort of now that connected us and out in the world of LinkedIn and in the broader construction community, not just limited to Northern California where I live and practice. And it was really sort of, I kind of had this epiphany of like, there's so many universal issues that the trades in particular face within the
Mm,
industry. It doesn't matter whether they're a concrete subcontractor in Northern California or they're a framer in South Dakota. A lot of these issues truly are the same. Now, of course, the laws between each state will change, but from a contracting standpoint, most of the time, the laws regarding construction contracts are fairly similar across the board. And so I sort of realized like, man, the lessons that I've learned and the sort of skills that I've taught my clients and the proactive risk management strategies that I've implemented with them are not California law specific. So how can I help
right.
elevate the industry as a whole without having to use my law degree, because I am, full disclosure, I'm only licensed to practice law in California. So I cannot act as anybody's attorney outside of California. But that doesn't mean that the lessons that I've learned can't be shared. And so
Right.
that was sort of the seed that ultimately ended up germinating into what I do now with all of the communities that I build and the coaching that I do and the speaking that I do, was just sort of this idea that there are enough universal lessons here that I can share with the community at large that don't require my law degree.
That's brilliant. And one of the key ones that you focus on is you help people understand and utilize the leverage that's already in their contract that they might not even know is there. But leverage is a pretty big word when it comes to litigation. When you use the word leverage, what do you mean beyond just bargaining power or who's the larger company? Like, what's leverage mean to you?
When I'm looking at any sort of issue around a construction contract, redline review, negotiation, whatever it is, I always try to come at it. This is going to sound like I'm not answering your question, so bear with me. I try to come at it with the idea that we really are in partnership, right? We all are
Mm-hmm.
in this industry together, regardless of where we are vis-a-vis each other in the contract, right? The owners want to get the buildings built. The GCs want to get the buildings built. The trade contractors want to get the buildings built. The specialty contractors want to get the buildings built. The material suppliers want to get the buildings built. We all are aligned in the same goal. Now, because of the system, of course, we are pitted against each other at certain phases of the projects, like when it comes to contract negotiation. And so when I look at leverage and look at how we're going to best approach a review, a red line, and a negotiation for any contract, whether that's a subcontract, a sub-tier subcontract, or a prime contract, I'm always looking at it through that lens of understanding that we are truly all in this together to create a building, to bring in a project on time and on budget. That's really everybody's goal every single time. And so when you look at it that way and sort of remove that idea of we're adversaries out of the gate and try to figure out how you can take what's in the contract already, the changes that you want to make within the contract, and package it in a way that shows all of the stakeholders, everybody involved, that there's a benefit or at least not a detriment to making some of these terms a little bit more fair to everybody. And that's really what I mean when I talk about leverage. It's a much more broad umbrella sort of term.
I love that. And I couldn't agree with you more, right? Like, we need more of the partnership. We're all in this together, High School Musical type mentality, right? And a lot of times, like, we're afraid to have that conversation, right? We're afraid to question a clause or propose a revision. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are afraid to just pose the question of what seems to be unfair in a contract term?
Yeah, I honestly think that it's a little bit of a relic of days of yore when it comes to construction. And what I mean by that is,
we have none of those, by the way, in construction.
no, of course not. Right. And maybe you have a different observation, and maybe you're going to disagree with me, AJ, and I'm totally happy to hear if my observations are maybe not consistent with yours. But from my perspective, it does seem that the industry has, at least over the last 15 to 20 years, moved in the right direction. And by right direction, what I mean is truly more collaborative. So when I talk about this sort of like a relic of the days of yore, right? Like in the old school days of construction, it really was like a pissing contest, right? It was really ego driven of like, who's the bigger man in the room? And I do mean man specifically because I'm talking about the days of yore, right? And so who's the bigger man in the room, right? Like, who's got more power? Who's got more bargaining chips? Who's got the true leverage, using it in the way that everybody else uses the word leverage? And it created necessarily that adversarial relationship that I'm talking about. And so every conversation was fraught with this sort of like, I'm right, you're right. And it was always just like a battle. There was never any attempt to find common ground to even see if it was possible. And so again, I think that we have moved in the right direction and we're continuing to move in the right direction. But I think we do still have some of those relics in the industry that can rear their ugly head Or we've got people that have been in the industry so long that they remember when that was the norm. And so it created this culture of fear where everybody is like, okay, so like, let's take a trade contractor. It makes it easier to sort of break it down if we're less abstract and we kind of use a real example. So let's take a trade contractor. They're out of the gate. They're an inferior bargaining position because they're on the receiving end of a subcontract that they didn't draft. Presumably
Right.
the subcontract that they're being handed was drafted by the GC's attorney in a way that is most favorable to the GC. And I don't fault them for that. That's what their attorney is paid to do. But when that comes with a no red lines accepted admonition, that's more of that old school mentality, right? And so for so long, trade contractors were told, we don't accept red lines, we don't accept red lines, we don't accept red lines, take it or leave it. Do you want the job? Do you want the business? And these trade contractors basically got shell shocked into like, well, shit, man, I've got projects that I'm in business to make money. I've got a crew to keep employed. They've got families to feed. I've got all of this pressure on me. And at the end of the day, if it comes down to signing the contract that's not so favorable so that I make sure I get that job versus trying to negotiate and having the fear that the GC is going to say, forget it, I'll just go with the next guy. Maybe his bid was a little bit higher, but at least he's not going to be a pain in my ass. Then there's that fear that keeps the trade contractors in check. And so that's what I like to try to overcome is like, we have made progress and we need to break out of that fear-based conditioning of what the industry used to be like. And we all need to work together to really embrace that collaboration that we are seeing more and more of to move forward in a way that we can find contracts that we at least spread the risk, right? I'm not saying we need to shift it all the other way. We don't need to overcorrect, but there's got to be some balance in terms of how we can allocate this risk in a way that's a little bit more fair, as opposed to every single person in the chain pushing down all the risk as low as they possibly can.
Yeah. And to your point, I would agree with you. We've made some progress. But I think, if I'm being honest, I think there's still a lot more of that. I've got 20 subs behind you, take it or leave it. Conversation still happening than we want. And so I want to dig into that just a little bit more because like this is construction. I hear you, Megan. We should be more collaborative. We should be partnering, but you know what? I need the work. I've got crews to pay. I've got mouths to feed, right?
Yep.
So with that in mind, what are you still seeing? Like what contract terms do you see people still accept? Simply because they're still kind of stuck in that old mentality and they're afraid to have that conversation.
I don't know if you saw the face that I made when you said it, because I just like my whole body has a visceral reaction because there's one clause in particular that is trending in the complete wrong direction. I see it. I used to never see it. And then I started seeing it pop up here and there. And now I see it in almost every subcontract. And I absolutely hate it. I think it's downright abusive. And it's the cross default provision, which basically says to the extent that you as a sub or trade contractor have multiple projects with this particular GC going on, then if you get into a dispute with the GC on project A, then the GC can withhold payment to you on any other project that you're working on with them. And that is wild to me. I mean, when I say abusive, I mean abusive. Talk about trying to, like, you're going to put people out of business. And I've had clients that were nearly put out of business because of the cross default provision. And so that one will, like, nothing will get me on a soapbox faster than talking about cross default provisions. It really, oh God, it gets me really upset. And I've had battles with GCs and with their attorneys about this. It kills me.
Yeah, I mean, let's not just talk about lack of trust or faith in that, like you said, that is downright brutal and punishing just because one project's having an issue, right? Which, like, the teams on the other projects could have absolutely nothing to do with and likely have nothing to do with. Yep. And yet they're the ones getting punished. So let's look at the reverse side of that clause, right? Let's look at Nirvana, right? What happens to trust between GCs and trade contractors when they actually try to partner a little bit, when they do share the risk instead of just throwing it at one another?
Yeah, I mean, right? Like we can sort of like imagine what projects would look like and what the world would be. And that's really what I'm talking about in terms of like, let's just spread and allocate the risk fairly instead of just trying
Mm-hmm.
to get one side to hold it all. I'm not asking the GC to be the one left holding the bag either. But
Right.
what I am saying is the GCs are almost universally in a better cash flow position to be in the sort of limbo of while the dispute is being resolved than any of the trade contractors ever are. And so, on balance, if we're looking at how do we make the industry as a whole better and how do we really embrace this idea of partnership, which, by the way, GCs love to throw around that term trade partner, trade partner, trade partner.
Yeah.
Well, then act like it. Treat them like a partner and engage in a back and forth conversation about their red lines instead of coming back at them and saying, no red lines accepted, take it or leave it, or we're going to go with the next guy.
Yeah. It's one of those put your money where your mouth is, right?
Absolutely. Otherwise, it's just marketing fluff. Otherwise, you're just trying to look good on LinkedIn, right?
So obviously love everything you're saying, but let's again be kind of honest and transparent with ourselves a little bit. Construction's in a tough spot right now, right? Projects are getting bigger, more complex. We're running into more ambiguity. We're running into bigger delays. Risks are all over the place. Profitability is shrinking. Labor is vanishing. Like, we've got all these things combining and coming down on us all at once. And they don't just affect the contract, right? They affect our stress level, our retention, whether we believe that we can truly make this a healthier place, right? So when we talk about this idea of deferring risk and we talk about this idea of partnering, like, what do you believe would change if more project teams discussed risks openly before work instead of protecting themselves and kind of hiding and keeping their cards close to their chest with their language?
I'm glad you mentioned this sort of emotional toll, right? We never really think about the emotional toll of any industry, right? But construction in particular, we never really think about that part of it because it's so
Mm-hmm.
background, right? Like we got a job to do, we got a building to build, we got materials to deliver, right? It's like boom, 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 boom. And we
Well,
never
and that
really sort
old
of,
school tough mentality too,
yeah,
right?
right. Like I don't have feelings. I don't need emotions. What are you talking about, right? It's like the classic EQ versus IQ debate, the whole thing, right? So I'm so glad you mentioned that because my answer to your actual question is I think the number one thing that we can address, I'll say, I don't want to say solve, but what we can address by truly being more collaborative and kind of approaching these things in true partnership format is that stress level, right? Because if you out of the gate from the moment you are on the receiving end of a contract, again, whether that's a prime contract that the GC got from the owner or a subcontract that the trade contractor got from the GC, as soon as you get that contract, if you can have a calm, collaborative conversation about requested red lines to more fairly allocate that risk, and it can be a back and forth and a true dialogue, then you are establishing trust out of the gate. You are setting up that relationship to be productive and successful throughout the duration of the project. Now, we all know projects rarely come in on time and under budget, right? Like every project has its hiccups. So we know that we're going to end up having we're going to end up with some issues. We're going to at some point end up in some level of a dispute with our upstream contracting partner, right? Like it could be a minor dispute, it could be a major dispute, but we're going to end up in some type of dispute, even if it's over notice requirements or LDs, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Every project has it. But if we've already established a trusting relationship out of the gate from the very beginning when we were negotiating that contract, we can trust that that relationship that we've built is going to guide us through that dispute in a way that is less stressful and will ultimately allow us to be a little bit more calm with how we approach the resolution of that dispute. Again, it's going to be necessarily adversarial if it's a big enough dispute. But if you have that relationship that you've invested in and you've built that trust already, it can be resolved in a way where the attorneys are the ones bearing the brunt of the adversarial, stressful part of it. And you can continue to do your work on the project business as usual without having that underlying animosity with the other party.
Right. And what's funny to me is like that all begins with knowing the contract up front, right? Like
Yep.
another one of our LinkedIn social spotlighters is Matt Graves, and he has that acronym RFC, right? Read the contract. And so it's interesting because just increasing your literacy when it comes to contract language can greatly improve your relationship on a project. And it doesn't take any counseling or special legal support, just knowing what you're reading.
Yep.
So one of the other things that I wanted to make sure that we touched on this today, because I think is really, really cool. You stepped out of your way to create your own conference. Like
Yeah.
the industry's full of events. They all have their place, right? But you noticed a gap, a smaller room, bigger impact. So you started what's called Converge, and you're intentionally building a different kind of room. What have those new Converge gatherings taught you about what construction professionals today are hungry for?
Connection. Hands
Mm.
down. Hands down. Um, to your point, Converge, yeah, is intentionally small, right? And I think the reason why it is successful despite its relatively small size compared to our huge industry conferences, right? Um, is because people really truly are craving that connection. They want that opportunity to get to know each other on a more human level. I don't want to necessarily say personal level because that makes it sound like we're all sitting around telling our deep dark secrets and that's not really what we're doing. But we are getting to know each other as humans, right? Fellow humans walking this earth with shared similar life experiences. And we all work in the same industry. And again, we may be adverse to each other in terms of on any given project which position that we have, but at the end of the day, we're all humans who are showing up with a passion for the industry. And so I think it's kind of captured lightning in a bottle a bit at Converge. And that's kind of the magic in the sauce that I think at least certain members of the industry, certain people, I think that really is what they are craving. And I think it sort of fills their cup and makes it easier to show up on these job sites when we do have adversarial situations that pop up, when we do have stress going on, when we're dealing with the challenges facing the whole industry that you so eloquently articulated earlier, like the labor shortage and tariffs and all the things that are affecting the industry writ large. I think that connection piece is what helps keep us all afloat. And so we don't all just burn out and check out.
So as you sit in that room, like what gives you hope that the industry as a whole is starting to become more open to these kinds of conversations? Because again, I'm in construction. I don't have feelings. I don't connect. We just get the job done. Like,
Yeah.
where are you seeing room for hope that that's shifting?
I think if we're tying it to Converge specifically, I'm going to say it's twofold. One, it's the fact that even though I'm intentionally small, I have increased my attendance every single year, which tells me
Ooh.
that as people learn about what is happening in that room, they're not repelled, they're attracted. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that alone is indicative that we're moving in the right direction and that there's something about that connection in the room that is drawing people in. So that's number one. And number two, I think the fact that we draw people from all sides of the industry together in that room, right? We are not a conference only for owners and owners reps. We're not a conference only for GCs. Despite the fact that I have a very pro trade contractor bias that I readily admit, we're also not a trade contractor event. We are a construction industry event. And we get people from all parts of the industry, service providers like myself included. And so I think the fact that we're drawing people from all sides also reinforces and highlights that that's the thing that a lot of people in the industry are sort of drawn to. They want to continue the forward progress that we're making. They want to avoid going back to the bad old days. And they want that connection to create a better industry that's less stressful and is happier for all of us to show up to every day.
I love that. And I think it's really important because, there are folks listening to this right now that are saying, yes, I'm right with you. I want that. I want that kind of connection. I want to feel less adversarial with my trade contractor or with my GC, depending on which side of the coin I'm on, or even with my owner, right? So let's take a step back for a second and let's say I'm a listener and I'm tired of the way that my relationships have kind of been built historically, right? And how I've had to leverage this piece of paper because the relationship isn't really a relationship to begin with. So if I'm one of those people and I'm looking at that piece of paper and I'm trying to figure out how do I do better tomorrow, right? Before redlining it or doing anything else, what is one question I should be asking myself about that contract the first time I look at it?
The vibe check.
Mm.
Yes, I said the vibe check. So I have a systematic approach to reviewing, redlining, and negotiating contracts, like I do it as a lawyer that I teach people to do, right? Like that's my thing. But every single time, it starts with the vibe check. And so I always apologize the first time I unveil what this system is because it starts with, and here's the apology, you do have to read the entire contract, every single
Ah,
page from beginning to end, but you only have to do it one time. So I apologize that you have to do it, but I promise you, you only have to do it one time. And that's because what you are looking for, that first read through from beginning to end, the only thing you are looking for is the vibe check. When you've read that entire contract, how did it feel? Did it feel
mm.
completely unbalanced? Did you read it and go, oh shit, I'm going to lose my pants on this one? Or did it feel like, okay, I can see where I've got some risk, but I can also see where the GC is going to continue to hold some of the risk as well? You're just looking for that overall vibe of how fair and balanced is the contract out of the gate. And knowing what the vibe is then informs what red lines you ultimately end up requesting.
I love that. And let's say I did find some things that I'm not exactly comfortable with, but I'm afraid, right? I don't know what I should do. Is there like a simple sentence or phrase that I could use when I need to question a term in a contract to someone upstream that's not immediately adversarial?
Well, I love the way you asked that question because asking a question is automatically less adversarial than making a declarative sentence, right? So
There
if
it
you
is.
truly are seeking clarification, and by the way, I advocate for that, right? Like to the extent that you can couch any of your requests as initial questions for understanding, you're automatically putting the other person in a less defensive posture and position. That people as humans, we want to be helpful, right? It's just like it's ingrained in us. It's part of our human nature. We want to be helpful to each other. And so if you come at it with, and you can play dumb, right? Like it's
Hmm.
no harm, no foul. But if you pitch it as, hey, GC, I'm reading over the contract and gosh, you know what? I've read this particular clause like 3 or 4 times. I asked ChatGPT to explain it to me like a fifth grader, and I'm still a little lost. Can you just give me some insight into how you interpret this, what you think this actually says? And that's not going to trigger any sort of defensiveness, right? Worst case scenario, they're going to go, I don't know. I haven't read it either. It's our standard contract that our attorneys gave us. I've never bothered to read it. I don't know what to tell you. That's worst case scenario. Best case scenario, they go, oh, wow, you know what? That is really confusing. I read it 3 times and I also don't necessarily know what it means. Maybe we should work together to come up with some language that is easier to understand and makes sense that addresses the underlying issue that this language is attempting to address. So there's a whole spectrum of outcomes, but none of them end with, well, fine, we'll just go on to the next guy.
Right. I love it's so simple, but at the same time, we often make it so hard. And it's just that whole help me understand, right?
Yep.
Like I want to be on the same wavelength with you.
Yep.
Currently I'm not. Help me understand why.
Yep.
And that can be super simple without being adversarial when you ask it, without sarcasm. So,
Yes.
well, I I love this conversation, Megan. I've had so much fun. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't. But thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your skills with us. If people have questions, like where can they find Megan? Where can they find Converge?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I am at Construction Contract Coach. You can also find me at my website, meganshapiro.com, and that will link to all of my other websites. So if you're interested in construction contract coaching, you can find that at constructioncontractcoach.com. If you're interested in bringing me in to speak or train, you can find that information at doitlikealawyer.com. And Converge can be found at convergeconstructionsummit.com. But again, all of those are linked through my primary meganshapiro.com website. So that's the only one you got to remember.
Awesome. Simple enough. Well, again, thank you for coming on today and thank everyone for listening. If this conversation resonated with you, please take one idea away from Megan and try it. see what happens. And if you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate it, or share it with your friends, someone else who might care about the future of construction, because construction is cool. We should all go tell our friends. Thanks a lot, Megan.
Thanks so much for having me, AJ. It's been great.